Hello guys, welcome to the channel. Hope you guys are doing fine. Today we are going to be recreating this really beautiful dress from Jimai West. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but I saw this style from her and I really love it, and we are going to be sewing it. So for this style I used a duchess fabric, and you'll be needing like 2.5 yards or 3 yards depending on your body size, and of course how long you want the skirt to be. Okay, so right here I've gone ahead to cut the fabric I'll be using for the front. So I placed it on fold, and the width of the fabric is 13.5 inches. That is on fold, so that means if you open it up it should be about 27 inches, while the length of it is dependent on how long you want the dress to be. Mine is about 32 inches, they're about 32-34 inches. So yeah, now the first thing I did was to draw a straight line from the edge of the fabric. As you can see, the fabric is not straight, so I'm just trying to have a straight line to work with. And then after that I'll be marking my chest line measurements, my bust line measurements, my waistline measurements, that is the natural waistline, and the hip line measurements. So I'll just go ahead to do the same thing on the other side of the fabric as well, so that I can be able to get a straight line by the time I'm connecting it. Okay, so yeah, I'll just use my rule and connect it, and this is what we have. And you also draw out the length of the dress, okay, that you want to use. So now from that top of the fabric I'm going to divide my shoulder measurement by 2, and I'll mark it. So normally my shoulder measurement is 7, but for the sake of today's tutorial I added half an inch to it, because as you can see it's a free dress. So I'll mark the same thing on the chest line, and I'll connect it from 1 inch away from the top line. I'll connect it to the chest line as shown. So after that, on the chest line I'll mark quarter of my bust measurement. So since it's a free dress, I'll still add extra half an inch to it. I added 1 inch while I was cutting, but I later reduced it to half an inch because I didn't want it to be too big. But 1 inch to half an inch depending on how free you want it to be. Okay, so right now I use 1 inch. Then from the top of the fabric I'll mark my neck width, which is 3 inches. So I'll go ahead and connect it to the shoulder like this, and I'll draw the shoulder for the dress. So the distance from from here is 7 inches, so I'll divide it by 2, that is 3.5, and I'll use my free hand to just connect it to the bust measurements. Okay, so if you did the correct thing, the distance from there to the other side should be about 1 inch, as I'm showing you right now. So at this point also I'll go ahead and mark half an inch inward from that straight line, and then next I'll mark my neck depth, which is 3 inches that I'm using for this dress, 3 inches. So after that I'll just connect it to the neck width like so, join it. One thing about duchess fabric is difficult to work with, so make sure you pin everywhere around so that you'll be able to work with it easily. So after that I'll just go ahead and mark my neck depth for the back, which is 1.5 inches, and I'll connect it to the neck width like so. The next thing I'm going to do is on the waistline I'll mark quarter of my waist measurements. I'm using 7 inches here, and I'll go ahead and add extra 1 inch. I added 2 inches at this point, but I reduced it to 1 inch, so just add extra 1 inch at that point. While on the hip measurements, I mark quarter of my hip measurements, and I added extra 2 inch, so use 2 inch for the hip line. Then after that I'll still go ahead and add extra 1 inch for sewing allowance. So I'll add it from the chest line to the waistline all the way to the hip line. You can go ahead and use the same measurements that I'm using right now. That is, you can add the 2 inch for yours as well, but if you wear it and you feel it's too free, you can just go ahead and reduce it. So that's exactly what I did for mine. So from the hip line I went up by 2 inch in this video, but I later increased it to 3 inch. So instead of going up by 2 inch, I went up by 3 inches. So I even added, and then I added sewing allowance, which is half an inch. So do the same thing for yours. Go up by 3 inch and then add half an inch for sewing allowance. So if you want to hem it, you can use 0.25 inch. Then for the length of the dress, I used 34 inches at this point, but I later reduced it to 32 inches because I felt it was too long. Okay, so 3 inch for the side seam, and then 32 inch for the length of the dress. So from the length of the dress now, I went in by 5 inch. Okay, so after I'm going in by 5 inch, I'll connect it to the center like so, and then from here I will just connect from the side seam all the way to that 5 inch point that I marked out earlier, drawing the curve. So you just use your free hand and just shape it as I'm doing right now. So after doing that, you just go ahead and cut it out. After cutting it out, this is what it looks like. So now I'll be using the front to cut the back. Okay, so I've also gone ahead to cut another piece of fabric right here, and I'll be placing the front on the back like so. So I'll make sure that I pin it very well. Remember, duchess fabric can be difficult to work with, so make sure you pin everything to secure it in place before you start cutting. So you go ahead and cut exactly what we have for the front, you cut for the back. The only difference is the length of the dress. So for the back, the length of the dress is not as long as the one in front. Okay, so when you cut and you reach that side seam point, instead of connecting it just the way it is in front, you can just curve it to the center front like that. Just curve it and shape it like that, so that it will not be as long as the one at the back. So you can curve it anyhow you choose. So it was not showing properly when I was doing it, so I just adjusted the fabric so that you can see exactly what I did. And I'll go ahead and notch the midpoints of the front and the back as well, and then I'll remove the front from the back. So now for the front, I'll go ahead and remove the neckline for the back, so that I can have the neckline for the front like so. So the front neckline is different from the back neckline, and I'll notch the midpoints. I'll also go ahead to go in by half an inch from the shoulder. So I'll go in by half an inch and I'll connect it like so. It's just like drawing your armhole for the front in a basic sleeve pattern. Okay, it's just the same thing. Just go in by half an inch and you connect. So at this point also, I've gone ahead to cut the lining that I'm going to be using for the front and also for the back, but I did not use a full lining for this dress. Okay, so now at this point, the next thing I'm going to do is, after pinning it down to secure it in place, I'll just go ahead and cut about 0.25 inch from the length of the dress all the way to about 1.5 inch away from the waistline. So make sure your line is straight when you are cutting. That's why you need to pin everything down. Make sure your lines are straight. So just cut 0.25 inch from the center front all the way, from the length of the dress all the way to the waistline. That is 1.5 inch away from the waistline. And I'm gone ahead to cut the lining that I'll be using for this part as well, and I'll do exactly what I did for the fabric, that is the front. I'll do the same thing on the lining. So I'll go in by 0.25 inch from the length of the dress all the way to the same 1.5 inch away from the waistline. So I'll just do it and I'll cut it out like this. So by the time you open it up, this is what it should look like from the front. Okay, so I'm just going to arrange it. As you can see, this is what it looks like. So another thing I went to do is to create a rope using the duchess. I just created a rope that I'll be attaching to the front. So what I did was to just fold a piece of fabric and I sewed on it, and then I'll turn it to the right side. And the length of the rope is about 30 inches long, thereabout. So when you create the rope, you place each of the rope on the left side and on the right side, like so, and then you sew it down. So and in this video I'm just pinning it down, but you just go ahead and sew yours to secure it in place. So I'll sew it using 0.25 inch sewing allowance. So after just sewing it, the next thing, you're going to use the lining, and you're going to place the lining over the main fabric, like so, and then you're going to sew using 0.25 inch sewing allowance. You're going to sew from the length of the dress all the way to the other side, like so. And then another thing you're also going to do is you're going to join the lining at the neckline point using 0.25 inch sewing allowance. You join it, notch it, and turn it to the right side, and then you top stitch it. For the back, I will do the same thing for the back. That is, I'll join the lining to the back. The only difference here is for the back, I'll measure from the neckline, I'll go down by 5 inch, and I'll use my chalk to just trace the 0.25 inch sewing allowance that I'm going to be using, and I'll connect it. When I reach to about 0.25 from the center, I'll connect it to the 5 inch points, like so. So what I'm doing is, I want my hair to pass through the dress effortlessly. If you don't do this and you sew it, you'll find it difficult wearing the dress, because your head will not be able to pass through. So I'm just creating that V shape at the back so that it can allow my hair to pass through. So I'll just go ahead and sew round using 0.25 inch sewing allowance. So at this point, I've successfully sewn the lining to the front side of the fabric, and I'll go ahead and cut it to just shape it like that so that it will stay in place. Your lining can be bigger than mine so that it will not be coming to the front by the time you're done. So at this point, you can just go ahead and notch it so that you can be able to turn it to the right side. If you don't notch it, you will not be able to turn it to the right side. And make sure that your sewing is straight. Duchess can be difficult to work with, so just make sure that your sewing is straight. Take your time and sew it very well. Like right now, my sewing is not very straight, but I still had to loosen it up to make sure it is straight, because if it's not straight, it will show in the dress that it's not a straight line. Okay, so just make sure everything is clean, and then I'll turn it to the wrong side like this, and I'll iron it very well. You can top stitch it round and then you iron it. So I've also sewn the back, creating that V shape using 0.25 inch sewing allowance. So now I'll just go ahead and notch it open from the neckline point all the way to that V shape. So just notch it very close to where the sewing stops. Okay, so just notch it, and then you can also notch that curve area of the back so that you can be able to easily turn it to the right side. So after this, I'll just go ahead and turn it to the right side. You can go ahead and understitch it, and this is what we have. Another thing I did was to add a button, the loop to it while I was sewing, so that I can be able to use it to attach the button. So now I'll just join the back to the front at the shoulder line, like so, using 0.5 inch sewing allowance. I'll also join it at the side seam using the 1 inch sewing allowance that we added while cutting. The next thing now is for the sleeve, is to cut the sleeve. In order to do that, I will go ahead and place my fabric on fold, and the length and width is as shown, and I'll go ahead and from the top of the fabric, I'll mark 2 inches away from it. So I'm using 2 inches in this video, but I later reduced it to 1 inch. Okay, just reduce it to 1 inch so that it will not be too puffy at that hand area, that is the shoulder area. Okay, like I said, after I sewed, I made some adjustments. So use 1 inch instead of 2 inch. From here, you're going to divide your bust measurements by 12, and you add 1.5 inches to it. So I got 4.5, so I'm marking it 4.5 from that line. So after that, the next thing now is I'll go ahead and mark my chest line minus 1 inch. I'll mark it there. Then I'll also mark extra 2 inches, so one for the ease and one for the sewing allowance. So from that east point, I'll connect it to the center front of the sleeve, and after connecting it like this, I'll find the midpoint of it. Then after finding the midpoint, I'll go up by half an inch. So after going up by half an inch, I'll connect it from that east allowance all the way to the 2-inch point. Remember, you are going to use 1 inch, so connect it all the way to the 1-inch point, like so. So the next thing now is for the length of the dress. I'm using 11 inches as a width. By the time I gather it, I'll get my normal width measurement. Okay, that is normal sleeve width measurement. So I'll just go ahead and connect it to that is the crown depth, and I'll cut it out like this. So by the time I'm done cutting it out, this is what we have. So another thing, I'll still go ahead, just like we did for the bodice. I'm going to do the same thing for the sleeve. I'll go ahead and go in by half an inch for the front side of the fabric, and then I'll also go ahead and hem the length of the dress like so, so that I can be able to pass the elastic through it. So after hemming, I'll go ahead and join the sleeve to the bodice. So from the side seam, I'll join to the shoulder all the way to the side seam. So at the shoulder, I'll gather the excess. Okay, so after that, I'll go ahead. I'll have an elastic band that I'm using for the sleeve width. It's about 9 inches long. Okay, so I'll go ahead and I will just use a bobbin pin, connect it to the elastic, and I'll pass it through the hole that we created while hemming. So after passing it through, I will now use that bobbin to secure it to the other side so that it does not come out like this. So I'll just use the bobbin pin, hold it in place, and I'll go ahead and sew using 1-inch sewing allowance from the length all the way to the armhole area. While for the skirt, it's just like drafting a basic skirt pattern. Okay, there's no difference. So just go ahead and mark out your waistline measurements, which is from the top of the fabric. So from the waistline, mark your hip line measurements, and you mark the length of the dress, that is the skirt that you want to sew. So after that, I'll go ahead now from the waistline, I'll mark quarter of my waist measurement, and I'll add 1 inch for sewing allowance. So while for the hip line, I'll mark hip measurement divided by 4. I'll mark 1 inch extra for sewing allowance. After that, I'll go ahead and connect it to the waistline. While for the length of the dress, I'm going to minus 1.5 inch from quarter of my hip measurement. So that means I'm marking 8 inches. That is 9.5 minus 1.5. That's 8 inches. And I'll go ahead and add 1 inch for sewing allowance. So after marking the 1 inch for sewing allowance, you're going to connect it from the length of the dress, that is the hemline. You connect it all the way to the hip line using your straight rule. You add half an inch to the waistline and you cut. So after cutting it out, I'll go ahead and also cut the back, but the difference is at the back I added allowance for the zipper. So make sure you do not cut the back on fold. You cut it putting into consideration that you need to add a zipper to it. So next, I've also gone ahead to cut the lining for the skirt, and I'll go ahead and join it using 0.5 inch sewing allowance, and I'll turn it to the right side and iron it very well. So for the back, I'll also do the same thing, join it, notch it, turn it to the right side and iron. So by the time I was done, this is what it looks like for the front, and this is what it looks like for the back. So I have 2 pieces for the back like so. So now I'll just go ahead from the hip line, I'll connect it all the way to where I want the slits to start from. So I'll just go ahead and join the front to the back at the side seam using 1-inch sewing allowance. So after sewing, this is what it looks like. And that will be all for today's video. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in my next one. Thank you. Bye.